All right, so we talk about again the body, soul, and spirit. This Trinity that everyone refers to, that a lot of people refer to, I think, but most would say body, mind, and spirit. So there's a lot of confusion about this, and of course, within the context of gnosis, there is a trinity of sorts, but it's sort of dualistic in a sense, yet and still. And according to gnosis, what you know of as spirit would actually be the well in Gnosticism it's the pleroma or whatever, but of course, generally speaking, is considered to be the primordial origin or the chaos complete, self-contained, self-complacent, and then you have the soul and the body, which would be earthly products, products of regeneration, of course. Our conception, our regeneration, our reproduction, or whatever, it's a mysterious and a metaphysical process. So, again, what you call karma is actually the transference of energies by way of seed and egg. And the karma, your karma, is your mind and your body. That's the original meaning behind actual karma. Karmic activity is life. Living is karmic activity because the whole thing is karma, because the whole thing is seen as a curse. The mortal coil, the mortal conception, perception, mortal senses, because you get pleasure and pain, of course, but of course, most lives are dominated by pain or lack. So it's considered to be a curse. So therefore, this is your karmic activity. Living, birth in of itself is karma, not this shallow psychological, emotional boomeranging that people talk about, which can actually be deflected and prevented. You can actually, your aura or whatever can be solidified against that anyway, which that is only a part of your psychology and perception. That's not karma. That's not what they're talking about. But anyway, I say that the conception, of course, and regeneration and reproduction is also metaphysical. You got to remember, if a couple has children, each child is going to be different. Even if they're twins, they could be similar, but they're different. So they are new products in a sense, but in a sense they're still similar because they're based in the same and similar essences. But in of themselves, as perceivers, of course, as subtle bodies, they are unique and individuated. So the subtle body, of course, is a part of the metaphysical transference of karma, which is done through, of course, by way of animal passion. So that's how you get the karma to transfer and regenerate into a new person that you call them, a creature, a being, or whatever, that has the capacity or the ability to perceive consciously. So there's a subtle body, of course. There's subtle matter also, and then there's a gross body, but they correlate. And the intermediary or the catalyst for this, of course, is the breath, not the oxygen per se, but the breath in of itself, because actually you breathe with your entire body. The cells breathe also. So breathing is actually permeated throughout your being. So you do have a subtle body and a gross body. They're correlatives, though. So, of course, in the concept of gnosis, of course, again, the spirit would be something that is actually inner consciousness. People who have access to this inner consciousness automatically gravitate towards information such as this, and also people who generally gravitate towards this stuff in general. Even the people who are the these delusional crystal worshiping, put some rocks in your water optimist or whatever, they still have something there. So I'm not saying they don't, but they still get snagged and misguided by the human ego, by humanity, because they can't see through the cloak of humanity, which is ego and suppression. And they're not honest about it, of course. So they get misguided. But there's that aspect which is still there, which is probably calling them to seek a higher knowledge, but they don't know where it leads. Of course, it gets snagged back onto this place. And then you get videos like that. The spirit science guy, I think they have delusions of one day founding a spiritual university where everybody's gonna come, and it'll be some new hippie shit or whatever. But it'll never work. It'll never last on this plane. This plane is too degraded. It's too debaucherous. And you got to remember too, most men and women are essentially bad. Essentially, no matter how good they act, most men and women are bad, or they are willing to do what you would call bad things. You know, just essentially in our nature, we have to be willing to do these things to survive. So it's there anyway. So you got to know that humanity is not good, or whatever you call your people, or humanity as a whole, or whatever. However you want to look at it, people are not good in of themselves. They just exist, and they exist in a constant state of need and craving. So that's already not good. They're not in a good position. So they're not going to be the best of creatures. I mean, you know, so people have a hard time admitting that, seeing that, which is really just the way of deceiving yourself also. But anyway, a lot of these people, I would say, get snagged, or even some of the people who have good intentions get snagged and go towards the astral consciousness, supreme consciousness, cosmic consciousness. Because here are the 7 levels. You start with unconsciousness, subconsciousness, dream consciousness, waking consciousness, then astral consciousness, then supreme consciousness, and cosmic consciousness. Now that's actually sort of an ascending ladder. And of course, unconsciousness would be the origin. And I'll get to that. The subconscious, of course, would be, well, that's what we all talk about. Everyone is, I'm sure you guys are familiar with what the subconscious is. Of course, it's sort of like the repository of all your inclinations. And of course, when you go into dream consciousness, which is the next consciousness, you actually get to see it. And that's the trick, or that's the mystery behind dreams, of course, because you can see, of course, you're seeing with your subtle body. Now, some people speculate that there's a dream organ. This is just a figment of some of the metaphysicians in the West have just came up with this dream organ concept to account for the dream consciousness, because you can see what's in your subconsciousness. Then, of course, you have waking consciousness, which you are in now. Then if you want to go past waking consciousness with the astral consciousness, and that's when people get into astral travel and trying to go to different worlds, of course. But, of course, even with the flat earth revelation, that is really, you should be able to really put that in its proper place and understand that that has something to do with the remixing information in the subconscious. That came by way of data through the waking consciousness, because people going to space and planets, nah, not happening. Those are not real. So that's sort of a remix. So we'll get into that because astral, again, also relates to the firmament, the stars. Then you have past that supreme consciousness, and some these yogis may talk about that. That's basically a higher state of bliss, joy, and understanding. These you get, these are the people who would teach compassion. Also, you get into the superpowers when you're talking about that. Then you have cosmic consciousness, which is basically, I referred to that in the alchemy video, Flat Earth and Alchemy. It's like the union between heaven and earth. And that also corresponds to how you would know what a plant could do. Basically, you would know the properties of a plant and a creature. You would just know these things. You have this cosmic consciousness of what they call heaven and earth, because again, cosmic is not just, it's not space, it doesn't exist. Cosmic would be this world system. You have the awareness of this world system as it is within your intuition. So, and again, that's even higher than the astral, because it's much harder, of course, to get there. But again, I said this is like an ascending ladder. From, in your mind, you can conceive of this sort of like the origin, the unconsciousness would be this this root. Now, of course, the unconsciousness is chaos. Consciousness is order. So whenever you get into consciousness, you're talking about laws. Whenever you're talking about laws, you're actually talking about what's considered to be contraction and essentially oppression, because it's lawful. You can't break the law. Unconsciousness is chaos. There's no law. There's no right or wrong. There's no subject or object. It's self-contained and of itself. No perception means no limitation, no contraction. That's the origin. That's chaos. Of course, to you, it's nothing. So nobody wants to be unconscious, because, well, that's the darkness, right? And I don't want darkness. And there's a quote from one of these the master, but he says normal people tend to reject the dark and approach the bright. Adepts are encouraged to be dark and obscure, then they will begin to attain eternal life. Well, what is he talking about? Again, people talk that stuff about the dark side, but you don't really know what they mean. By darkness, again, they're talking about the chaotic unconsciousness, again, which is potent because remember, you emerged from unconsciousness. You go into it every night in order to recharge. But even though it recharges you, you know, again, he says normal people tend to reject the dark and approach the bright. Now, what they call worldlings in this perspective would be looked upon as moths to a flame. The sun would be that flame. Because creatures, on the surface, they love the sun. They love the bright light of the sun. But the sun is merely a bug zapper. You don't believe me? Ask an archaeologist. It's a bug zapper. So, again, he says adepts are encouraged to already be dark and obscure because that was the eternity. That is the eternity, and it's not anything you're going to worship. I mean, again, you're going to merge with it. You can become it in a sense. A lot of people who are into a meditation would understand this, but again, what's the first thing they tell you when you get into meditation? Close your eyes. Already the intent is right there. The pessimism toward the world is in that first command or instruction. Close your eyes. Your two eyeballs are really nothing. It's a contraction of energy for this natural cage. Like Shakespeare says, all the world's a stage. Well, yeah, all the world's a cage. This flat Earth realm is just a cage. So the adepts seek the primordial, dark, chaotic obscurity, which again is the real potential, and you are a kinetic, whereas the potential would be always full. And the kinetic is looked upon as an error. It's not necessarily a lesson, it's really an error that needs to be reversed. That's how it's looked at. Not this spiritual evolution toward cosmic consciousness. So, again, people reject dark because, again, when we talked about unconsciousness, people don't like the unconscious. But again, that's where you get all your energy from, in a sense. And really, all of the time, you're really pulling from that. Or this energy itself is pulling from that energy in order to give you energy, who you call you. So this is considered to be an involution or devolution, actually, from the chaos of unconsciousness. So actually, astral, supreme, and cosmic consciousness would be a devolution to the highest understanding, because they say even the gods, have to die, etc. Well, that's really what they're saying. They're trying to put you in on the fact that, well, even those states are not really lauded. They're not actual, but they're metaphors for certain states that certain practitioners could get to. But they would always laud the unconsciousness as the highest potential. And I know this is hard for people to understand because you're a creature. You got to get out of this creaturely thinking. Because again, unconsciousness is actually the rule for you anyway. That's where you're going back into, or you as you. Trust me, this chattering, monotonous mind, this deluded, desperate, anxious thoughts, it will be dissolved back into the unconscious. That's the rule. This is an exception. So you have to sort of invert your view of consciousness, because this is why people want to be gods and they want to live after life, because they actually think that consciousness is advantageous, when again it's really a contraction of energy, and then it's diffracted through the sense organs. So it's actually nothing to be desired. And so again, in the mythologies, they have these beings considered to be, and I say beings, unconscious gods. They're considered to be in the constant unconscious state. And in the myth, the guy says, well, whenever there is consciousness, there's the fear of the hands being cut off, and all sorts of other fears. Then he says, enough of consciousness, only the unconscious state is peaceful. So that's pretty much the mentality of someone seeking enlightenment. Again, because what you call unconscious is something that is so vast and so much more conscious than you that you would have no clue, of course, unless you were able to, or you did try to tap into that. Now, some of you may have an inkling, of course, about that, but just getting your view of what you call unconscious versus consciousness to invert itself, because it's inverted. Consciousness, again, is sunlight, daylight. That's a bug zapper. So again, the only true state, again, would have to be a state that contained no perception, no consciousness. And so when you talk about astral consciousness, supreme consciousness, cosmic consciousness, you're still talking about frauds. And these would be a part of the flat earth realm with its firmament and those mysterious orbs in the firmament called stars, and even the moon energy. And they talked about this, the ancients. These energies are basically fucking with you. But again, it plays with the beings down here on this plane. But again, the origin, of course, which would be the spirit, I would call it, transcends all of that. Now, of course, your individuated subconscious, dream consciousness, waking consciousness, astral consciousness, supreme consciousness, and cosmic consciousness, because they are individual, independent on you being you as you. Sometimes you look in the mirror, sometimes you close your eyes and say, well, this is me. But sometimes you look in the mirror and say, well, this is me. That you, that composite, this composite you call you, is all a part of this flat earth realm in its regenerating processes. So to say that you have a spirit as far as the a fragment of the primordial, you can say it that way, but it's not individuated. It's not you. It wouldn't want to be you. Trust me. Chaos Complete would not want to be you. I don't care, even if you say without a body, your mind. Chaos Complete would not want to have your mind. You can't even control your mind. So all of a sudden, you're going to leave the body and just be a mastermind? That's fantastical fancy. But you can say that, well, there is a fragment of the primordial chaos complete, the unconscious, in me. Now, of course, it's semantics, because then you call it spirit or soul, depending on the school. Some people would say primordial soul. What they're talking about is the self. The self, the capital S, is the unconsciousness, chaos complete. That would be that third factor. And of course, the living body in the spirit, or in some schools, the living body in the soul, is transitory and terminal. It has to be reproduced down here by way of the karmic transference, by way of the seed and egg. And that's how you reform and regenerate your karma down here in the form of a body mind. These creatures, with all their karmic activity in this on this basically hellish plane. So essentially what you have with birth and with death is the birth of the subconscious, all the way through this potential, of course, for cosmic consciousness, which most will never even come close to. And you also have the death of the subconscious, and also the potential or the attainment of cosmic consciousness. All must be absorbed back into the chaos complete, because that's the only reality, and that would be considered to you the unconscious, which you would call my soul. Peace.